Welcome to The Explainer. So right now, it seems like everyone is completely losing their minds over the latest AI app updates, flashy software features, and generative art. But there is actually a massive hidden crisis brewing right beneath the surface, one that Wall Street is quietly preparing for. Let's dive in. On the surface, the masses are furiously chasing AI software and buying the exact same three chip stocks over and over again. Everyone wants a piece of the shiny, visible technology. But beneath the surface, well, that's where the smart money is operating. They are quietly positioning for a massive bottleneck of power. The big financial players are moving heavy capital behind the scenes because they know a fundamental truth that totally gets lost in the software hype. AI simply cannot survive without a massive, stable flow of electricity. It's kind of like a giant iceberg. The flashy apps are just the tip, but the foundational power requirements, that's the massive unseen base hidden beneath the water. All right, part one, the AI power bottleneck. When we talk about artificial intelligence, we really need to start thinking bigger than just a convenient app on your phone. We're actually talking about heavy physical infrastructure. The sheer mind-boggling scale of what we are building right now is, honestly, staggering. Behind every single AI prompt you type, whether it's generating code or summarizing an email, there is a physical building. We are talking about massive data centers, packed to the brim with thousands of GPUs and networking systems that run incredibly hot. These buildings are essentially giant electricity monsters requiring intense cooling and processing power. To put it into perspective, if we keep building at this current pace, a single AI data center could consume as much power as a major city like Los Angeles or New York by the year 2035. Every single query you run relies on these power-hungry giants. So here's the million-dollar question. How do we power them? Because we have a major problem. America's electrical grid is old. We're talking Christopher Columbus old. Much of our existing infrastructure was built for older, simpler homes and traditional factories with super predictable usage patterns. It was absolutely not designed for a modern future where a single, sprawling data center draws city-sized amounts of power without ever taking a break. Our current grid just literally cannot handle this sudden, explosive surge in demand. Which brings us to part two, the constant power solution. So how do we fix this gridlock? What kind of energy do these data centers actually need to keep the digital world turning? The core dilemma is actually quite simple when you break it down into intermittent versus constant power. Look, solar energy is incredibly powerful, but eventually the sun goes down. Wind energy is fantastic, but the wind eventually stops blowing. AI data centers, though, they never sleep. They need continuous cooling and processing. They need electricity flowing without interruption, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this is exactly why nuclear power has suddenly emerged as the absolute savior of the AI revolution. It's the only baseline carbon-free energy source capable of running constantly at the scale we actually need. And hey, this isn't just theory. The biggest tech players in the world are already making massive bets to secure their energy future right now. Amazon and X Energy, ticker symbol XE, are currently in discussions to deploy more than 5 gigawatts of nuclear capacity. Just to wrap your head around that massive number, that is enough continuous carbon-free energy to power an entire small city. Tech companies are realizing they literally have to become energy companies just to keep their AI ambitions alive. That is the immense scale of the solution we're looking at. Moving on to part three, a national security priority, because this is where the story shifts from a simple tech infrastructure upgrade to a very real geopolitical chess match. Here's the thing, just pulling raw uranium out of the ground isn't quite enough. Uranium enrichment is the ultimate choke point in this entire process. It's the highly specialized, absolutely necessary processing of raw uranium before it can ever be safely used inside a nuclear reactor. It requires highly advanced centrifuges and deep technical expertise. Without this critical enrichment step, all that raw mined material is practically useless for generating the power we're talking about. And that brings us to a rather alarming geopolitical reality. Over the past few decades, the United States has heavily relied on foreign processing, slowly losing most of its domestic uranium enrichment supply to Russia. Decades of outsourcing mean that a critical resource for powering our most advanced future technology is now heavily dependent on foreign processing. It creates a major bottleneck where the fuel required to run the future of domestic tech has to pass through global competitors. Obviously, that kind of historical vulnerability is simply unacceptable for future growth and national defense. And that is exactly why the government is pouring literal billions of dollars into domestic enrichment deals right now. They need to rapidly rebuild this capacity on home soil to ensure that everything from Navy submarines and aircraft all the way to these massive new AI power grids are fully secured. Establishing an independent domestic supply chain for enriched uranium is no longer just some economic goal. It is a critical defense imperative. Let's dive into part 4, the smart money plays. Let's pull back the curtain on how Wall Street is actually playing this bottleneck of power. So there are some undisputed leaders emerging in this space, each serving a unique strategic role. First up, you have Camco, ticker CCJ, acting as the primary backbone supplier for governments and utilities across North America and Europe. They provide the sheer volume needed to get things moving. Then there's Centrus Energy, ticker LEU, sitting right at that critical enrichment bottleneck we just talked about. They don't mine the material, they process it, sitting squarely at the intersection of defense and energy. And finally, Uranium Energy Corp, ticker UEC, a US-based company positioned perfectly for policies that prioritize domestic sourcing over foreign assets. And finally, part 5, protect your capital. Because before you jump into these massive infrastructure trades, you need a strict system. You can't just blindly press buttons here. Rule number 1, 10%. A 10% loss is your flashing caution light. If a trade pulls back 10% against you, that is your first clear signal to pay attention and actively prepare to protect your capital. It removes the guesswork, right? It forces you to acknowledge that the momentum might be shifting before it becomes a major problem. And right behind that is your hard cut-loss point, 20 to 25%. If a trade goes against you by this much, it is gone. Period. No exceptions, no hoping it magically turns around. It is always better to preserve your capital so you can fight another day than to stay emotionally tied to a losing position in a volatile market. Protect your bread at all costs. So instead of holding on to losers, what should you look for? You want market leaders that are literally doubling the S&P 500 performance. That kind of massive, undeniable momentum confirms that the big institutional players, the smart money we talked about earlier, are actively backing the stock. When you see companies outperforming the broader market to that degree, it shows the major funds are stepping in to sustain those huge moves. Let's bring this all together. The world is changing rapidly, and while we can't change the headlines, we can certainly adapt our strategies. You can pause software spending. Companies do it all the time when budgets get tight, but you absolutely cannot pause infrastructure once a global power race starts. Building data centers and securing energy grids takes years of planning and billions of dollars. Foundational infrastructure is an absolute unstoppable force. Which leaves us with one final critical question. Are you looking at the nuclear play, or are you still stuck chasing the chips? Take a moment to really think about that. Wall Street is already adapting to this new reality of power bottlenecks and national security priorities. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Protect your capital and keep learning.